Hey everyone, Ludwig here. When Clint Eastwood walked into one of LA's most luxurious restaurants, wearing nothing but a simple polo shirt and slacks, nobody recognized the legendary actor and director. That's when an arrogant waitress made the biggest mistake of her career, trying to kick out and humiliate a man she assumed was just another random older customer. What she didn't know? Clint didn't just have a reservation, he owned the entire restaurant. And in true Clint Eastwood fashion, he turned this moment into the most unexpected lesson about respect that restaurant had ever seen. It was a typical Friday evening at the Grand Oak, one of LA's most exclusive restaurants. The recently renovated dining room buzzed with LA's elite, young tech moguls in designer suits, social media influencers capturing their gold leaf desserts, and old money families maintaining their weekly traditions. Among them sat a man in a simple gray polo shirt and casual slacks, quietly sipping whiskey at his usual corner table. Most of the veteran staff recognized him immediately. How could they not? 6 months ago, Clint Eastwood quietly purchased the Grand Oak. But he had one strict rule for the staff: treat him like any other customer. During his periodic quality checks, he believed the true measure of a restaurant wasn't in how they treated celebrities, but in how they treated everyday people. Rachel, the restaurant's newest waitress, didn't know any of this. Fresh from a prestigious hospitality school and building her own food influencer following, she spent her shift alternating between fawning over social media personalities and casting disdainful glances at the underdressed man in her section. Thomas, the longtime manager, watched nervously from across the room. He'd seen that look in Rachel's eyes before, the same one she'd given last week to a retired surgeon who dared to wear loafers instead of formal shoes. But tonight was different. Tonight, her judgment would carry consequences she couldn't imagine. As Rachel's clicking heels approached Clint's table, Thomas held his breath. The veteran staff tensed, recognizing the calm before the storm. The quiet man in the polo shirt just took another sip of his whiskey, that familiar half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Rachel positioned herself at the table, iPhone partially visible in her apron pocket, her practiced smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Sir, I couldn't help but notice you've been nursing that house whiskey for quite a while now." Clint looked up, meeting her gaze with the same steady calm that had faced down countless Hollywood executives over the decades. "It's a good whiskey," he said simply. "Perhaps," Rachel continued, her tone dripping with fake concern, "you'd be more comfortable at the bar. We're expecting several reserved parties, and this table," she gestured to the pristine white tablecloth, "is typically for our dining guests." Nearby, a young busboy named Miguel, who had immigrated from Mexico 2 years ago, overheard the exchange while clearing a table. He knew exactly who the man in the polo shirt was. He had grown up watching every Clint Eastwood film with his father. His hands tightened around the bus tub, fighting the urge to say something. "I'm comfortable here," Clint replied simply, taking another unhurried sip. Rachel's professional veneer cracked slightly. She glanced at her watch, then at a group of young tech executives waiting by the host stand. "Sir, our executive chef prepares a very exclusive menu. The prices," she paused meaningfully, eyeing his casual attire, "reflect the caliber of our establishment." At the next table, an older couple who had been regulars for years exchanged a knowing look. They knew what was about to happen. And it wouldn't be Rachel who had the last word. The older couple, who had been regulars for 20 years, shifted uncomfortably. The husband started to speak up, but his wife gently touched his arm, recognizing the look in Clint's eyes. The same look that had preceded some of cinema's most unforgettable moments. "I'm aware of the prices," Clint said quietly, his gravelly voice carrying that familiar weight that had commanded audiences for decades, "and I'm aware of the chef's work." Rachel's smile vanished completely. Now irritated, she pulled out her order pad with sharp, deliberate movements. "Well then, sir," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "shall I explain our menu? Slowly, perhaps?" The last words carried a distinct jab at his age. Miguel, still standing nearby, couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Miss Rachel, maybe I should get Thomas." "Stay out of this," Rachel snapped at him. "Go bus tables. That's what you're here for." She turned back to Clint, who had watched the exchange closely, particularly interested in Miguel's attempt to intervene. "Now, sir," she continued, her voice rising slightly, enough that guests at nearby tables were now openly watching. "One last time." The tension in the dining room became palpable. Other guests were trying not to stare, but the contrast between Rachel's growing agitation and Clint's unshakable calm made it impossible to ignore. "This isn't some diner off the highway," she pressed on. "This is the Grand Oak. Maybe in your day, things were different, but now we have standards." Clint set his whiskey down slowly and deliberately. The movement was subtle, but somehow it commanded more attention than Rachel's outburst. A few of the older patrons recognized it, that same measured calm before some of cinema's most legendary moments. "In my day," he repeated softly, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Yes, your day," Rachel scoffed. "When people could just walk in anywhere, dress however they wanted, order the cheapest drink, and take up space meant for real customers." She was fully committed now, her frustration bubbling over. "Times have changed," she continued, gesturing toward a group of young entrepreneurs snapping selfies with their gold leaf desserts. "This is a luxurious environment for people who appreciate modern luxury. They get it. They respect what the Grand Oak represents. They're not here pretending to be something they're not." The irony of her statement hung in the air. A few veteran servers exchanged knowing glances. Meanwhile, Thomas, the manager, was just steps away, his face pale as he finally realized the situation was spiraling out of control. "Modern luxury," Clint repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the words. "And what exactly does that mean to you, Rachel?" Hearing her name caught her off guard. She wasn't wearing a name tag, but she quickly recovered, assuming another server must have used it. "It means," she declared confidently, "understanding that some places aren't for everyone. Our clientele expects a certain ambiance." She gestured again toward the tech executives, then turned back to Clint. "This isn't some set for one of those old cowboy movies. This is a prestigious establishment, and I won't have you ruining the experience for our real guests." The moment the words left her mouth, the restaurant fell silent. Thomas froze mid-step. Miguel dropped his bus tub with a crash, the sound echoing through the dining room. The older couple gasped audibly, but Clint's expression remained unchanged. Without a word, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. "Jerry, could you bring me the ownership papers?" "Right now. And bring the renovation plans we discussed last week." Clint set the phone down and looked back at Rachel, who was beginning to sense that something was very, very wrong. "You see, Rachel," he continued in that same calm, steady voice, "I've been coming here every Friday for the past 6 months, sitting at the same table, ordering the same whiskey. Want to know why?" Rachel's face paled, the implications slowly dawning on her. "Because 6 months ago, I bought this restaurant. Not for the prestige, not for the modern luxury, but because, for 50 years, the Grand Oak stood for something real. A place where genuine hospitality meant treating everyone with respect, regardless of what they wore or how many followers they had." The silence in the restaurant was absolute. You could have heard a napkin drop. Moments later, Jerry, the restaurant's longtime accountant, appeared, carrying a leather portfolio. He nodded respectfully at Clint, handed him the documents, and stepped back, trying to hide a smile. Rachel stood frozen, her order pad hanging limply at her side. The reality of her situation was hitting her in waves, each realization worse than the last. She hadn't just insulted a customer. She had insulted Clint Eastwood. She hadn't just insulted Clint Eastwood. She had insulted her own boss. And not just any boss, a living legend who had built his career playing characters who stood against the very kind of arrogance she had just displayed. Clint's voice, deep and unmistakable, cut through the silence. "Miss," he said, his gravelly tone commanding the same respect it had across 6 decades of cinema, "let me tell you a story about this place." He gestured around the dining room. 50 years ago, I came here for the first time. Wasn't famous yet, wasn't anybody, wore a shirt pretty much like this one. But the owner back then, Old Man Thompson, treated me like I was the most important guest he'd ever had. Not because of who I was, but because that's how he treated everybody. He paused, taking another sip of his whiskey. When his son wanted to sell the place 6 months ago, I bought it for one reason, to preserve that spirit. Real class isn't about designer labels or social media followers. It's about dignity, respect, and treating everyone like they matter. Miguel, still standing nearby, straightened up a little taller. The older couple at the next table nodded approvingly. Even some of the young influencers had put down their phones, caught up in the moment. Clint turned back to Rachel, his legendary steady gaze locked onto her. "So the question isn't whether I belong here," he said. "The question is whether you understand what this place really stands for." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling around her. But what happened next surprised everyone, especially her. "I could fire you right now," Clint said, his voice gentler now. "But that's not what this place is about." Instead, he gestured toward Miguel, who stepped forward nervously. "This young man tried to warn you. He recognized me, not from social media, but because he watched my films with his father. He understood something you didn't. Respect isn't about appearances." Turning to Miguel, Clint spoke with quiet authority. "Son, how would you like to start training as a waiter? We could use more people who understand what real service means." Miguel's eyes widened, his face a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Clint nodded before turning back to Rachel. "As for you, Rachel," he said, "your choice is simple. You can walk out that door and find another job at a place more focused on modern luxury. Or you can stay, learn from Miguel and our veteran staff, and discover what real hospitality means." Rachel wiped her eyes, looked around at the dignified faces of the longtime staff, and took a deep, shaky breath. Then she made her decision. I'd like to stay and learn, sir, if you'll let me." Clint nodded, setting down his empty whiskey glass. "Good choice." Thomas put Miguel in charge of her retraining, and as the tension in the room dissolved, the older couple at the next table began to applaud. One by one, others joined in, not for the celebrity in their midst, but for the lesson they had just witnessed. A reminder that true class has nothing to do with clothes or status, and everything to do with how we treat each other. Today, the Grand Oak remains one of LA's finest restaurants, not because of its luxury, but because of its heart. And if you ever stop by on a Friday evening, you might just see a man in a simple polo shirt, sitting at his usual corner table, quietly ensuring that the old values of respect and dignity live on. Hey everyone, this was Ludwig. If you enjoyed this story about real class and timeless values, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments about a time when someone judged you wrong and how you handled it. See you in the next video.